Each day, John Michael Chambers delivers his JMC War Reports, keeping you informed, empowered, and connected. These reports are brief and range typically from 3 to 7 minutes, providing updates on this war and just what you need to know as the golden age is upon us. Informative, insightful, and inspiring. Get and stay grounded. Subscribe for free and join JMC for his daily war reports at jmcbroadcasting.com. Our victory is assured, and we shall restore this republic and set humanity on a much-needed course correction. Follow John's daily war reports right here at jmcbroadcasting.com.
All right, July 23rd, Thursday, 2026. Thank you all very much for being here. This is a special report. My name is John Michael Chambers. Before we bring on our guest, Derek Johnson, I'd like to provide some dialogue to get us into the mindset and then, of course, have our esteemed guest break this down here in this special report. Let us begin. The wheels are turning. The machinery of justice, long suppressed, long delayed, is finally grinding into motion. President Donald J. Trump has officially declared, based on data from whitehouse.gov, that foreign agents interfered with the 2020 election. This is not speculation. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is official acknowledgement from the highest office in the land. The data is public. The evidence is undeniable. And the cover-up is collapsing before our very eyes. God bless our Commander-in-Chief and President Donald J. Trump. Now, we have waited years for this moment. Through mockery, through censorship, through the weaponization of every institution, we held the line. Now the Commander-in-Chief is stating plainly what we have known all along: foreign agents, domestic complicity, election theft. And the promise that follows is even greater. We will never have a stolen election again, and justice is coming. And that's what I'll put on the record, in my opinion. All roads lead to Obama. President Trump has said it. I've said it. And now the evidence is confirming it. The threads of the 2020 election fraud, the weaponization of intelligence agencies, the cover-up of corruption, all roads lead to Obama. Not as a theory, as a conclusion. The data points are far too many. The connections are very clear, and the pattern is unmistakable. So what a year 2026 will be moving forward now. Not just for the exposures, but for the restoration, for the moment when the American people finally see the full scope of what was done to them and who did it. You've got complicit media in violation of U.S. Section Codes 2384 and 2385. Seditious conspiracy advocating the overthrow of a government. We'll get to that later. So I stated this numerous times in 2020 and beyond, that the mainstream media was not just biased, they were complicit by knowingly publishing false narratives, by suppressing evidence of foreign interference, by coordinating with intelligence operatives to shape public opinion. They have now crossed a legal line. U.S. Section Code 2384, seditious conspiracy. U.S. Section Code 2385, advocating the overthrow of a government. These are not symbolic statutes. They are federal crimes, and they apply to the corporate media entities that participated in the greatest election interference operation in American history. The evidence is in the emails. The testimony is locked in. The timeline is documented, and justice is coming for them too. So what happens next? Audits accelerate. The fraudulent machines are being replaced. The forensic evidence is being preserved, and arrests will follow. The architect of the theft, foreign and domestic, the architects of the theft, both foreign and domestic, will be held accountable. Decertification proceeds. The states that certified fraudulent results will face legal and legislative reckoning. New elections, honest ones, secured ones, ones that reflect the will of the American people. This is not a dream. It is a plan in motion. Your role? Stay informed. The mainstream will lie. You know the sources that tell the truth. Stay prayerful. This is a spiritual war as much as a legal one. So stay ready. The transition will not be smooth, but it will be worth it. God bless again our Commander-in-Chief, President Donald J. Trump, and God bless the American people who refused over these 10 years to give up. Justice is coming. Trust the plan. 2026 is the year. Derek Johnson, retired Army veteran, known to many as Rattle Trap 1776, emerged into the public view after a globally viral rant delivered one fall afternoon on the Alabama landscape. His message resonated widely and challenged prevailing narratives across the political spectrum. With an extensive military background and generations of military service in his family dating back to the Revolutionary War, Derek brings deep familiarity with military laws, orders, regulations, customs, optics, and communications. His lived experience across generations of service informs his analysis, forms his analysis and commentary. Derek contrasts mainstream and alternative media narratives by examining military and federal laws and orders in chronological order, highlighting elements often overlooked. Through this framework, he represents interpretations centered on the role of the military and constitutional authority. After all, this is a military operation, folks. In addition to his commentary, Derek is an accomplished country singer and songwriter. In the long history of country music, he is noted for achieving back-to-back Billboard country airplay hits with songs titled Real Cool Kinda Hot and Right Beer Right Now, one of my favorites. His music career, branded as Derek Johnson Country, reflects a blend of traditional country influence and modern success on the Billboard charts. Now, most of my audience knows Derek Johnson, but there's so many new people coming aboard. Please follow Derek Johnson's work. I think you'll want to after this episode. Rattletrap1776.com. Derek is also the gentleman that helped incubate, form, and launch the idea of the Global Defense War Military Panel in its second year now. Please welcome a good friend of JMC Broadcasting, Derek Johnson. Thank you for being here, Derek. Let's talk. You know what I want to do? I'd like to just launch right into this clip from our Commander-in-Chief, President Donald J. Trump, on the subject of declassification. And we're going to start having Derek weigh in on this with some pointed questions and follow-up I'll have. Let's run the clip.
Tonight, I'm announcing the immediate declassification and release of critical intelligence revealing shocking vulnerabilities in our election infrastructure. This evidence shows that the election system we have dangerously exposes like levels never thought possible to hacking, exploitation, and foreign interference. Just as disturbingly, this vital information has for many years been covered up and hidden from you, the American people, our beautiful, our great American people. But that all changes right now. The documents we will release starting tonight have been gathered by the White House Government Transparency Task Force, a great group of people, along with the staff of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, supported by our top intelligence agency chiefs, who have all personally reviewed the findings. We are presenting this evening and fully confirmed their authenticity. You can see these documents for yourself at whitehouse.gov. That's whitehouse.gov. Go check it out. Our purpose in disclosing this information is not to weaken confidence in election, but to earn that confidence by confronting vulnerabilities and correcting them very, very quickly. And that's what we're doing.
I broke down President Trump's address to the nation in great detail on BOCE Briefs with retired Lieutenant Colonel Ricardo BOCE. And now we'd like to have Derek Johnson weigh in on that. Derek, speak to the target audience as well as the already awakened, if you will. And what do we mean by target audience to our audience? I'll have Derek define that in a moment. We'll start there. But I'll proliferally say that in part, while it's a military term that Derek will define, it is also for those people that are just looking around, just kind of catching these narratives that and learning of these issues that aren't necessarily haven't reached them over the last 10 years because they've been engulfed in mainstream news. And now they're coming aboard and finding out truths in platforms like mine and many others. That is one way to define the target audience. Derek, if you would, define target audience, and then what is your commentary about about the declassification? Because a lot of folks within our movement have called it a nothing burger. I see that statement so far from the truth. This was a very important speech. Take it away, Derek.
Well, the target audience will be same thing that we learned in business school is your defined demographic. Who of course, you can always break that up. Like I always talk about back during the Revolutionary War. The population was 2.3 million. But there was only 1.8% on average out of that 2.3 million that were fighting. So, think about all the others. What were they doing? Doesn't mean that their life wasn't worthy or valuable or anything of that nature, but were they paying attention? Did they know what was going on around them? Did they know what the fight was about? Did they know what it was going to, establish? And then also moving forward, were they going to be a participant of it? They were definitely a beneficiary of it. So it's the same thing as what's going on right now. Everybody's a beneficiary, but do you care? And I always say if you're going to comment, especially if you're going to foolishly comment, then you should also be willing to be foolishly put in your place because on that fall day in Alabama, August 24, 2022, everybody remembers my very first ever video that people came to know me. I was giving everybody hell because I'm like, how are you this blinded, but also how are you this disgraceful to the military? We got a nation who claims they love our military, and we just had our 250th birthday. Everybody got to go to the beach or some bar or somewhere, a park or a picnic or something, and they got to sit and enjoy barbecue and fireworks and all these things, but you're only as free as your surroundings allow you to be. Well, that's brought to you by the United States military because that's our ideology. That's how we function in the United States of America. That's why all of our songs are like mine, Call America's Back. If you stomp our flag, we'll stomp your ass. And Toby Keith will put a boot in your ass. You mess with our livelihood, then we got something for you. If you'll buy into our livelihood, we also have something for you. So it works whichever way you want to look at that. But to me, it's a disgrace to the military to sit and say it's a nothing burger. Anyone out there saying that, because I can show you lawfully that United States National Guard have been the key player in what President Trump calls the intelligence. Now, if everybody would go back, not the target audience, but you, the patriot audience, the awake audience, you'll go back to January the 20th, 2017, the two headbands that walked behind President Trump, military intelligence and judge advocate general. Well, military intel in the military, we have our own division for that. All right. Not everybody walking around has intel, especially in the military. But in the military, we have our own division for that. All right. That's one of those headbands. The other headband was judge advocate general. Well, who puts what in court? All right. So intelligence is what you provide in order to put into court. Right. Okay. We have this evidence here, what President Trump's talking about. This also kind of jumps ahead because I cheated and read the dialogue a little bit, but it also works perfectly for me to address it right here on one little sliver is when you hear people out there saying, well, you say the deep state's not here anymore. Well, I can show you why and how that's the case. All right. What you're seeing on TV right now is theatrics. So if you want to be called a patriot, you want to be called away, you want to be over here in the 1.8 percentile of the 2.3 million back in the Revolutionary War, whatever that number is right now, if you want to be that, then this is how you do that. You shouldn't be following what you think is real in real time happening right now. You got to look at, unfortunately, I call it a shame on you and a shame on me situation, right? Shame on you for not knowing what you're supposed to know, but shame on me for allowing you to look that way, right? Now, it's not me necessarily, but if you're out there like that, don't worry about your family and what your friends think about you. If you know what I know, it's nothing to be ashamed of because you'll have all the facts. All right, but that target audience out there, they don't have those facts. They're still walking around aimlessly, whining, griping, fussing, complaining, when there's an absolute blueprint in place of the 45-47, and I'm the guy who wrote it. All right, but getting back to the declassification, every bit of everything everybody's been witnessing since 2018. Now you can go back to 2017 with those visuals, but lawfully, President Trump, Executive Order 13848, with a declaration of a national emergency, September the 12th, 2018. Following up, the first time in United States history, the National Guard cyber security teams have been deployed to elections. Now, on the flip side of that, you can go over to Title 18, which is federal crimes and criminal procedures. We also have a section in the federal crimes that prohibits soldiers from being at the polls. Meaning, like, if you went and got in your uniform and I went down there and stood at the poll, especially being a veteran and out of service, and I get my uniform, I go down to the polls and I try to convince you or coerce you to vote for a candidate. That's against the law. That's federal law. And I could be called, especially being retired, all right, I could be called back into active duty specifically for the reason of courts-martialing me and get punished for that and be stripped of retirement and everything else for doing so. That is how strict the military is, ladies and gentlemen. So there's already a law that safeguards that, where military don't go down there, coerce you, persuade you, and those things. So then revert back to the Title 32 or Title 10 order, which right now it'll tell you that Title 32 state fundings have been the key cause or the key invocation of these elections. It still doesn't matter because President Trump would have had to funded that. All right, so people forget about Title 32. It has to have a funding there. So when did that take place? 2018 and 2020. Then what shows the deep state is all the facade, meaning like they have to show this to the target audience to wake up the general public out there. So ladies and gentlemen, target audience, general public, same thing. So to wake them up and to get them engaged, sometimes it's like President Trump says, you got to give them what they want. Well, unfortunately, for all of us true patriots, true veterans, etc., we hate drama. They love it. So you got to give it to them the way they will engage in it. And that's unfortunate for all of us. And that's why we're over here doing what I call the piddle. The piddle, we're just sitting here, but it's barely moving. And we're just sitting here going, oh my God, this is so painful. But if we're used to it, it's okay for you to be used to it. So the National Guard deploys for the first time in United States election history. All right, 2018, 2020, 22, 24. Why would quote unquote Joe, quote unquote Kamala, and quote unquote the DNC, why would they be deploying the same National Guard under the same orders? Ladies and gentlemen, that wouldn't make any sense at all. Which, if you thought Joe was real and you thought that administration was real, you'd have to acknowledge that they knew what the National Guard were doing. I mean, that is the very reason the liberals are whining over President Trump. Oh, he's overuse and overabuse and all abuse of this, that. Well, you can't. It's one or the other. It's like my dad used to say, we're splitting hairs here. Which side is it? What are you going to pick? What are you going to choose? You can't believe in both, right? You either believe President Donald John Trump is who he is, who he says he is, and what he has reflected, which to the liberals, they think he's destroying democracy. They think he's destroying the fabric of America. They think he's a king, a dictator, and a Nazi. Well, if you go with that rhetoric, just play along with it for a moment, go with that. Let's just say that. Then that would also mean that Joe, Kamala, and Obama, and Bill, and Hillary, and all, it means they're all in it together. That's just not the case. It's not the case monetarily because of what President Trump has done to the rest of the world. All right. And that's why all these capitulations have happened. That's why all these nations are on board with us. We're talking about nations who traditionally, not traditionally from a set standard supposed to be, but traditionally meaning what people have thought of, have been on board with the deep state for all those years. They have capitulated to President Trump and they're doing everything by his standard. The other thing is a national emergency. One national emergency, ladies and gentlemen, comes with 120 statute powers. One of those is regulate commerce and restricting telecommunications. So telecommunications, PBS and NPR lost their funding in 2024. Well, that would have been when the world thought Joe was president. So how come the DNC couldn't save their two very, very liberal establishments, all right, in 2024. All right, so when you look at that, then you'll be able to see the telecommunication side of the media where they're being controlled. Everything is capture, control, capture, control. No matter what they're saying, it's all strategic based. If you'll remember, especially if you're over 40, you can go back before 2017. Man, I mean, they would write everything and anything. They have Joe Biden as a former vice president saying why Hillary should have never ran and she wasn't a good candidate and this other. They trashed each other and bashed each other, but it was publicity. Negative publicity is publicity. You don't see that anymore. It's all strategic based, and it's all geared around President Trump. No matter if it's negative to you, no matter if you think it's not good, but it's all strategic based because of who they're reaching out there. And there's always going to be a bait and switch, because I can show you the 45-47 as a strategic blueprint and break it down from a 40,000 foot view. So then when you go pull a sliver out of it, you'll be able to say, oh, that does make sense, because why aren't they saying this? And why aren't they saying that? So you'll be able to see the strategic planning of what the media is being controlled with. And it's not a bad thing to see negative publicity out there because it's all strategic based. And so, anyone who's saying it's a nothing burger or anything like that, you're absolutely, whether you know it or not, but you're absolutely disgracing the military by saying that, because every bit of what's been taking place intelligence-wise has required the National Guard cybersecurity teams and special operations. And that's not just special forces, what people think of as Green Berets and Delta Force. That's all kinds of civil affairs and also military squadrons all around the board, Marine Corps, Air Force, Space Force, you name it.
Thank you, Derek. You unpacked quite a bit there. And my quick follow-up is to the nothing burger concept. Even the awakened in our movement have called it, some of them, a nothing burger. And I do understand why they're calling it that, because they've known about these things for years, and they're expecting something else in the speech. And I believe that by expecting and anticipating and creating narratives that you think the president's going to be speaking about is your own fault and mistake. We're not here to be pouncing on everyone. We're trying to help us all. Expect the unexpected. That's probably all you should expect. And while the awakened does understand, I believe, Derek, the importance of the speech and what's going on, they're just waiting for the justice and all that. So from that perspective, I get it. But we're going to jump into the weeds right now. I'm going to sort of set this up. I'll be very methodical in reading this, and we'll have Derek weigh in. Listen up, folks. We're going to get into the weeds now. The constitutional activation of the PEADs under asymmetric warfare, under the asymmetric warfare conditions, the official declassification of unedited intelligence documentation detailing the organized theft of the 220 million voter files the president spoke of by foreign entities activates the highly classified PEADs. To those that don't know what the PEADs are, follow Derek, but the PEADs are Presidential Emergency Action Documents at the highest echelon of national security. So talk about a nothing burger? I don't think so. These precisely codified executive decrees of the commander-in-chief function outside the visible civilian legislative apparatus as the unbendable legal foundation for COG, continuity of government, a narrative that Derek has permeated throughout this movement over these years. More than a narrative, a military fact. So within the framework of fifth generational warfare, the PEADs engage the exact millisecond the regular civilian electoral infrastructure is forensically verified to be compromised by an adversarial foreign power, and the state's administrative branches are subverted. So the legal casualty is seamless. China's asymmetric cyber warfare campaign, forensically validated by the CIA and D&I protocols, as we now know, instantly suspends the civilian jurisdiction of the Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, for all implicated institutions. So in conclusion, the PEADs authorize the Allied Military Command and the Department of Defense to place critical communication, energy, and government networks under direct military protection. Before we talk about the red folder, I just unpacked quite a bit, thanks to Guardian Daniel R. What are your comments about the PEADs as they relate to this, as it relates to this speech? What is the significance of what I've just walked us through?
Well, first things people need to see first and foremost is why President Trump would have to activate such a thing. Now, it was already pre-planned because that you could take a contingency plan such as President David Eisenhower, but the average American out there, even we'll give them a little bit of credit. We'll just say that they know about term limits. They think the president has term limits, and that was something that happened in 1951. It's not constitutional versus Article 2 of the United States Constitution. Our founders never addressed term limits because a lot of them thought that as long as we, the people, were sane and engaged in what we're supposed to be engaged in, then we should be able to vote in who we want as many times as we want. Because if both components are doing what they're supposed to be doing, then it'll be reciprocal, right? So that makes sense. So first things first, people think that. So what they did was genius to be able to give President Trump 4 years, pull him back 4, give him 4, and you get 12 versus what would have taken 8. Either way you want to split the pie. It's like it'd be 8 straight out the gate. So that was genius. Now, there were things that were going to happen. Right, they knew there was going to be retaliation by the deep state somehow, some way, somewhere. All right, bioweapon, nuclear weapons; those are your biggest things. And then medical fields. When you tap into something that people already fear with life and death, then when you change a word or verbiage up, and then you put the fear of God in them in another kind of way, the wrong way, the evil way, then you can confuse them and you can control them even more. Right, so. President Trump, that's why you'd see him in March 2020. He'd grimace when he was in like press conferences. You'll see him do like that when he's being asked questions, because even the actor, but even President Trump would have known that there's certain things that he just couldn't say. Right? This is operation. And it's a real deal, meaning like this is full-fledged. When it was go time, it was go time and no looking back, meaning escalator was just the visuals. But when January the 20th, 2017 took place, that's when go time was. So all the applications of law and every national emergency and everything else have been invoked that outlines unique and extraordinary powers by the president. See, this is where a lot of people out there, even regular commentators, don't even know this. And then also, how much work are they putting in on the outside when they close these screens down? How much are they reading and studying? The average commentator can't even take one law and break it down. I can take 100 at a time. And put them in one segment. So PEADs was a term most people have heard of before, and they were established. You have way back here in President Eisenhower, he was a 5-star general, which was rare. All right, we've only had 8 post the Civil War, and he was a master strategist, and he came up with a contingency plan, even though we already had a continuity government plan per se, but he fine-tuned it. He had a contingency plan for after a catastrophic event. He would have what you can go read about on RutgersUniversity.edu. You can read The Atomic Midwife. They've got this broken down. It's a great piece to read, where if you look at every one of President Trump's endorsements right now, it's the same exact playbook. It's where you put into place, you endorse all these high-level, high-merit, highly successful businessmen and women, and then also or special operators, Navy SEALs, and then a few regular veterans, depending on them. When I say regular, we're talking about colonels and lieutenant colonels with records as well. But maybe they weren't special ops or Navy SEAL. So that's what President Trump's been endorsing. And that is straight out of President Eisenhower's playbook of a contingency plan for continuity government. Then you got to get into all what FEMA and DHS, and that's what he also broke down in that speech for election interference was FEMA and DHS. Well, FEMA and DHS put out all these new federal continuity directives January the 17th and June 13th, 2017, with a joint planning and joint operation, which is your military, All right, 3.0 and 5.0, which are your joint components of who would be doing what during a continuity government. All right, so you got to tie in all those and then know that there's 4 ways, ladies and gentlemen, just 4, that the military pairs with federal. There's executive orders, national emergencies, proclamations, and treaties. Well, those are the 4 components of a PEAD. All right, and they all require the executive branch. They all require the president. Now, a PEAD, though, is like an executive order, proclamation, treaty, and national emergency on steroids, meaning that he could write and have prepared 20, 40, 60, 100 at a time. That way, they're all signed just as quick. All right, versus having a staffer come in and go, hey, we could do this, and then we could do this. No, it's pre-planned, basically. All right, and a great example, President Trump took the oath again, January the 20th, 2025. He had a speech shortly after that, marking the first 100 days in office. And he said, I've signed a record over 350 executive orders. No, he didn't. There was only 100 on the Federal Register up to that day. So where were the others? In presidential emergency action documents, because they're draft classified. All right, meaning you're not going to see them yet, and you may not never see them. You may not have to see them, but you got to trust your commander, because that's exactly what a PEAD is for broader emergency reasons, which also still shows we're still in the operation. And I know people get tired of that. Look, I mean, I get it, but at the same time, it is what it is. And when we get done with this, that 12 years is going to look like a breeze when we get through it, right? And you're going to have it done correctly versus what the average patriot out there would do. You just take out a few of the big guys and you let everybody else just linger out there. That ain't what we've done. We have cleaned out from top to bottom.
Thank you, Derek. PEADs, P-E-A-D-S. I would venture to say that the majority of our audience, myself included, 5 years ago, never heard that term. Okay, this is an education, folks. We're being educated from the initial cue drops all the way through this very moment with the key people and that are making sense of this for us. And Derek being one of them. Thank you for the explanation and the power and importance of these PEADs. It's very important. And folks, you might say, "Oh, who cares? I don't want to be in school." You better be in school. If you're going to continue to call things like this speech a nothing burger, it's time to go to school. So, but anyway, thank you. And most of our audience gets it and understands it. And both Derek and I have enormous respect for everyone that's not an enemy combatant in this thing. We're just trying to help. So I want to move us through to the red folder, Derek. Declassification of the red folder and the unsealing of Supreme Court filings. The exclusive enforcement mandate of military jurisdiction, the JAG, Judge Advocate General Court. So because the Bar Association, the Bar Guild, and civilian statutory benches stand exposed as core components now of the deep state, the JAG assumes absolute command under Title 10. I'm reading to us right now, compliments again of Guardian Daniel ought to have Derek weigh in on this. So domestic citizens who weaponized major U.S. enterprises and economic elites for this subversion are classified as unlawful combatants, bypassing civilian courts to face military tribunals, Nuremberg 2.0, under the maximum sentencing guidelines of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, for high treason. What is your commentary and opinions about what I've just walked us through here, Derek?
Well, yeah, that's always a question. Can civilians be tried in a military tribunal? And yes, they can, especially crimes against humanity, high treason, and things of that nature. And then also, this goes back to, again, I was telling a friend yesterday, I'm like, not all lawyers and not all judges know every aspects of the law. Meaning, like, they may focus in on certain things, but also the abuse of what they're doing too. And there's some good lawyers out there. Let's just be honest, because people are people. It's not the title that corrupts you. It's who you are as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And so many judges and lawyers, though, depending on what their focus is, some of them don't have any clue of military law. They have no clue of national security, which UCMJ is military law, but let's make it the special term it is. But the Uniform Code of Military Justice, A lot of them don't know that. So, for example, Jack Smith would be a great one to pull up. Now, even though I know this is theater and it's all part of a plan and it's all that, but for the average person out there, to break this down in simple terms, let's say Jacko, that's what President Trump called him, was Jacko. And I'm sure I know him well enough to call him, probably even add to it, Jacko the Wacko, right? But, someone like that who just absolutely hates somebody, they use their office as a weapon, right? Because again, it goes back to the bar. As you and I know, you and I can't walk into their establishment without having proper procedure and proper representation, or you're not going to speak to the judge. It's how they've got it set up, right? And the same thing when you talk to a lawyer. They're not going to represent you if you talk down to them or degrade them or say you're this, that, and other, right? It's something they've established. Now, I do believe in establishments. I do believe in respect and things of that nature, but it goes back to, if you're not being respected back, then we got a problem, right? Because that's not what you're there for. You represent us. You represent me. So when you get to someone like Jack, now I know it was all set up and this is all theater, but someone like him could have not known a thing that was going on lawfully, militarily. And he could have been walking right into a trap and then all of a sudden realize, uh-oh, now he may not have realized it, but could have realized it that, oh my gosh, I have been set up and I'm in a trap. So it goes back to President Trump established Executive Order 13977 on January the 18th, 2021, just 2 days before he would be leaving quote unquote office. And quote unquote Joe and Kamala and the DNC and Obama and all of them, they never revoked that executive order. That executive order was it was a protection order on all law enforcement and their families, judges and their families, and then prosecutors and their families, which he's setting the standard of, hey, you all are about to be put in the hot seat. You're about to be put in the seat of integrity, what you're going to stand for, what side of the line you're going to step across. All right. So when you get into all those things, that's what President Trump has set up. And so, it goes back to always walking around. I call it the front end. If you're walking on the front, you'll have the middle and the back. So, Jack Smith, all these other things, though, is all part of the theater. It's all part of the game that they're showing people, but it's also educating people on what they're supposed to know about. And I know it's such a big, broad spectrum and it's a big can of things, but I may not explain it completely. And I may have gotten a little off, but anyways, that's kind of where I'm at. And I think I've actually forgotten the question, but that's just me.
Well, no, you've covered it
Oh.
earlier on, and I appreciate. Go ahead.
What was the exact question again? Where did I entangle myself around?
Sure. One moment. We were talking about. I was excerpting a piece of the Guardian Daniel Oz War Report, and we were discussing the declassification of the red folder, the unsealing of Supreme Court filings, and then we invoked the bar and the JAG, and I think we pretty much covered it. If you have something else you'd like to add briefly, please do so now before I take us into new territory.
Well, that's why I always make notes, because I like to go off what President Trump calls a weave. I like to weave things in, and then sometimes I weave too far, and I'm like, where did I go? But
Yeah, I
the
understand.
red folder is real key. The red folder is key another way, is because if you'll look at President Trump's post on True Social, when he'll nominate or he'll endorse somebody, you'll see a little blue square. It looks like a trapezoid, and then he has these 5 red flags. All right, that's taking one of their old symbols, and basically, I'm trying to think of it. I said a word the other night I shouldn't have used. It was kind of a funny word, but he's basically crapping on one of their symbols, if you will. So the red folder, the red color, and what they call the 3 red banner, right, in Chinese, right, which stands for communism. All right, so the red folder, and you've seen the red folder with Kim Jong-un and also Putin as well. So it's a symbol to show everybody. Now, you're going to get some people out there in the Patriot world, boy, they'll hop on that symbol thing and they'll rabbit hole it really bad. But it's when people realize what's going on with the overall operation, and then also at President Trump, when he drained that swamp, it's also taking all of their tactics and using it against them. Same thing with the CIA and the body doubles. You're taking all their tactics and you're using it against them. And it's what I was going with Jack Smith, where I kind of wove way too far in another way. But using that is the fact that you use their tactics against them. And once you disclose that to the public learns that. They educate themselves on that. They sharpen their skills, empower themselves. And then if somewhere down the road, out of the golden age, which will be long after you and I, but somewhere down the road, children's children will have playbooks from us that we've written and then broadcast like this. And they'll be able to take that and be like, that's exactly what that is if they ever encounter that again. Right? So when you expose tactics and you expose those things, strategies outline, the operation and then the tactics, and you expose that. So the red folder is just more of a symbolic timestamp, proclamation, and then also there may be a segment down the road where President Trump and his people are going to go have this, movie that's just based off of red folder events, and then break it down that way because we know everything's going to be chronological order, dialogues, like Melania's documentary. Right? That's the start of it because people love visuals. So that's what the red folder really is. It's just a symbol to show you who's all part of this, who's all part of President Trump's grander plan. And people have got to quit following all these other people out there that keep thinking that Kim Jong-un is this and Putin is that. They all have capitulated.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. And to our audience, I'm going to unpack one last setup. People say, John, these are long-winded questions. They're not long-winded questions. They're setups to frame very important subjects and then culminating to a question ultimately. Let me state this. This will be the last Guardian Daniel R. Excerpt from a relatively recent war report off the heels of President Trump's speech. And then, folks, to our audience, I'm going to ask some pretty simple layman's questions, if you will, that I know is on the mind of people. And we'll get some quick answers from Derek. So stick around. But this is very important. Derek, the logistical containment of electoral infrastructure leading to 2029. The command for the immediate deployment of allied task forces to the compromised states serves as the physical execution of the PEAD that we just spoken about, military directives here on the ground. The forensics detailing, now we get into the heart of the matter, the forensics detailing the comprehensive failure and dishonesty of electronic voting machines deliver the public international law baseline explaining why regular midterm elections cannot occur on legacy software during a national emergency. The alliance controls and freezes the civilian voting matrix via the levers of Executive Order 13848 until the administrative clearing is completed and the transition to the unhackable, which is where we're heading, folks, quantum financial system and voting system, QFS, is executed under land law, maritime. This precisely structured sequence confirms the mathematical parameters of the 3-year transformation corridor leading to the official conclusion of President Trump's term, January 20th, 2029. In conclusion, the progressive release of these core intelligence records fluidly prepares the collective consciousness for the ultimate engagement of the emergency broadcast system. To comment on anything you choose there, one, of course, is the importance of Executive 13848 within that dialogue, and any commentary on the emergency broadcast system. Your views, Derek?
Well, yeah, with the Executive Order 13848, the key with that is in order for President Trump to secure his legacy. Now, I say it like that, people would think that I'm contradicting the operation. I say that for the target audience out there that are still maybe in the laggard world or dragging, maybe sitting on the fence and, still learning things. For President Trump to secure his legacy, I mean, with every single topic out there that he has absolutely taken on, he would have to be successful in all of them. right? You couldn't even be a 80-20 because he is so unique, he's so different. And then also when he has made promises, right, to a guy like that who was not political, not military before, right down the middle, for him to be super successful, he would have to be accurate on everything. And election interference, one of them. But as far as the executive orders and national emergencies, he would absolutely have to be so different from what the past, because that's how they weaponized the deep state. They used national emergencies as a smoking mirror to be able to say the words laws and orders out of their mouth. That's why so many people are struggling with what I talk about, because they hear the words laws and orders and they've heard this for years. But it's the application of them. And you finally get a guy, whether you believe it's an operation or not, but you finally get a guy who's enforcing every aspect of the law. And then also, you don't need multiple laws. The law's already there. You need an order that has the law to support it. And that's what President Trump represents. So that one executive order alone, September the 12th, 2018, well, there's already actions that show that it's being utilized, it's being enforced. But then also, you got to bring that to a close. All right. And we got to terminate a lot of national emergencies. Well, Iran's one of them. And that's why so many people struggle with the term war versus a conflict. Every bit of what's happening in Iran is straight out of an Air Force pamphlet from way back in the day with Vietnam, 110, 131-10 or 110-31. I give that a look at the numbers. I'm not an Air Force guy, but it's straight out of there though. It's a conflict. It's not a war. All right, but there's an executive order from Jimmy Carter from November the 18th, 1979, which is older than me, that has an emergency, a national emergency, that's been continued every year by Congress since then, active for right now. That's what President Trump's using. That's what he's using against Iran. So anyone out there saying, oh, he boasted on he didn't start a war and all of a sudden he started one. No, he didn't. You got to learn the terminology. And that's where you got to sharpen your skills and empower yourself and elevate your thinking, right? He didn't start a war. This is a national emergency that's been going on for 47 years. All right. And that's when you'll hear me on my own podcast break down the NDAAs of 21 to 25 and what specific verbiage is in there that's never been in there before. But that would be during the quote unquote Joe years. But then President Trump's the one that's fulfilling those. So there's so many things that you can point back to. But this one executive order and the National Guard, they have all of the data. Now, what's cool about National Guard and our cybersecurity teams is we operate in the military off of analog, not digital. We can't be hacked. So when our teams are operating, we're getting all the data, real-time data on who is and who isn't voting. And then who's trying to hack a system. See, we can tap into those systems and we can see who's doing that. And it's real simple stuff for them because we're talking about IP addresses and tracking who it is, where it is, what it is, and how many are there. So we have all that, and that's what President Trump's talking about. And as far as emergency alert, I don't know what they're doing and how they're doing it in the sense of I'm not in a war room. But we can kind of speculate, and I just think that the way personally, and I may be wrong, it's like a buddy of mine says, we always joke that we're 99% correct, but we got 1% there because we're human. And we know every single law that President Trump's using. We also know all the military portion because we're veterans, right? So, and then specific things that we're doing right now that we got opportunities to do externally, but still, keeping our oath. So we're making guesstimated things. And I think the way that President Trump wanted to be exonerated, meaning like secure his legacy, it's got to be people from the other side. There's nothing he can say. There's nothing a general can say. There's nothing a Republican say, conservative. It's got to be the other side that does that. All right. And you've seen Jeb Bush congratulate him on Iran. You've seen a lot of things that of people that he said we're never going back to Karlov and Jeb Bush days. He said that way back in 2023. So you seeing people praise him in certain ways. Bill Clinton praised him with certain things. So you're seeing some of that, and that's going to increase. But then an emergency alert, the reason why I think that would be cool is, Q has its drop, but Q doesn't get specific on the how. What I think they could do with the emergency alert is use it in a positive manner. Because right now, after our 250th we can't have anything that would diminish the 250 in history books. And we also can't have anything from here in the golden age that would also diminish that, right? And even though you could spin something and say, well, it could be catastrophic, but we could twist it around later on the road. No, it would prolong that. It would push us further on out into that, meaning like that target audience. It would take them, we'd push them further out into being accepting of such a brilliant operation by all of us that are operating in it. So emergency alert would be cool because everybody's phone, and I have two of them, obviously a work one and my personal, it's the old Game Boy, anybody remembers that, or Nintendo, right? So if you remember those days, right, what would be cool is if I always like to use a pub or a tavern or a bar, right, where most people are trying to go to get away from everything. They just want a drink, a pool table, a sports TV or something where they're not thinking about anything political whatsoever. What would be cool though is if that's what they did use, and it would be long, it would be a long-term thing, but it'd be X amount of days for disclosure. But if they use the emergency alert system, that's every phone, that's every TV. It could be localized, it could be nationalized. It don't just have to be global or nationally. But it would be cool if that happened because then nobody would be able to say, John, is that AI? Are you sure? Are you sure that's not someone pulling your leg? Is that it? Everybody's phone would flip. Everybody's TV would flip. Everything.
Yeah.
And then that's when you have an Obama or someone massive on the left, not on the right, someone massive on the left. And I just use Obama, just saying because it's a massive figure. Like you bring that in to the picture, and you get this guy going, yeah, President Trump and I have been working together and whatever, the disclosure like that. And people are going to be like, what am I watching? But then they won't be able to look at you or I and be like, hey, is your phone doing this? My phone's not on that. That must be a bit to separate what we have today. And you and I know AI it's great. I love it. But phones, everybody's got a phone in their hand 24/7. And then they're also on Instagram or TikTok. There's somewhere where it's got videos. So they wouldn't be a believer in that unless all of their phones are on the same accord, right? And they're not going to be a believer in just a regular disclosure either because there's so much. You and I have all the answers as far as the blueprint of the laws and the orders of what President Trump's doing, and then that blueprint. And people, they won't take time to read, study, comprehend. We're not talking about patriots. We're talking about that general public, that their friends and family, the patriots who are telling them, hey, read, study this, comprehend. They're not doing that. So what would get their full attention on both sides of the aisle? I think it'd be a cool strategy to use the emergency alert in a positive manner, not a doomsday, but in a positive for disclosure. And it's kind of a finally like, sit your what down and shut up, right? Moment where it's like, okay, we've done everything here, and here. Now we're ready to full-fledged disclose. And I think that's how they could do it. And it'd be a cool way to do it. And then we'd all be on the same playing field. And it'd be I don't think it would create fights at a barbecue or fights at a family get-together. I think it'd be great talking points. And then that's where, we do, as patriots, we will have to be like, don't say I told you so. But we can finally get into the talks with them and say, now do you want to talk?
Sure.
My dad always said that. Sure. Do I have your attention now? And so like, well, yes, you do. Right. And then that's where we act professional and we act like we're supposed to be. Yes. And then we say, well, here's how it was done and not in a condescending manner. Right.
Yeah, well, great points there, Derek. And I want to add to the list of folks that you started to list out that, and it's a great observation. I think everyone should be duly noted how some of these notable figures on the left are in certain situations and systematically seem to be acknowledging the president in his camp. Add Hillary Clinton to that list. We saw her recently say something positive about President Trump. I think it was about Iran, of all things. It was some aspect. But anyway, I want to move us into this before we get into the media, and then after the media, get your closing talking points and wrap up our special broadcast. But I'd like to ask you this. The way I see it, well, let's see what you say. The Save America Act is on the table. Will it pass? Unlikely. If it doesn't pass, we have a few options here. Challenge me on this or feed to the notion. Insurrection Act, declaration of national emergency for elections, or simply a delay in elections until we continue on in the operation to make sure we have free and fair elections. I said earlier in the monologue, and I believe this, it's just my humble opinion. I don't believe, with all we've been through and what the president has just released to the world via his address, that we're ever going to have another stolen election. At least in my lifetime, I'm 68. We're not going to have another stolen election. This will be prevented. So having said that, if the SAVE Act doesn't pass, is it the Insurrection Act? Is it a declaration of national emergency to secure free and fair elections come midterms? Or did the midterms get delayed until we are prepared to vote and get a free and fair election? Now, we've shed blood, as you and your generational family knows very well, over these centuries, certainly decades, to see that other countries can have free and fair elections, and yet we don't. So again, Insurrection Act, declaration of emergency, or delay? How do you see it playing out come November?
Well, the Declaration of Emergency is already invoked with the Executive Order 13848 because it ties specifically straight to the elections, not just interference, but interference can encompass a lot of different terms. So there's that. And then also, this is why it goes back, it pays to know. And I tell veterans, I love veterans, and there's a lot of veterans who follow me and know exactly what I'm about to say, but there's a lot of veterans out there that don't, and they make one law applicable to everything. There's multiple sections under a Title 10. There's multiple sections under a Title 14, Coast Guard, and then Title 32, National Guard, and then your Title 50, which obviously is your War Powers Resolution, which I believe is unconstitutional, like President Trump says, but that's another topic. But because the American public have seen that for so long, and then their perception of how the National Guard operate and function outside of your federalization. But if you'll go back to, speaking of federalization, what they've been pumping in the media right now is you'll see the Democrats and the left talking about federalization. Oh, Donald Trump's trying to federalize our elections. Well, that term is perfect because that's another example of what I was talking about earlier with media saying things that you wouldn't typically agree with because they're left and they don't like President Trump in the normal, just run-of-the-mill talk. But when you boil it down, you home in on it, and then you know what's going on lawfully, then you bring in stuff like the Insurrection Act. Well, we're already in a form of martial law. President Trump talking about we're an occupied country. We will soon no longer be an occupied country. The Great Restoration begins on January 20th. Well, those are all straight up law war manual terms and military government terms, which ties in back to President Eisenhower, which ties back into contingency plan and continuity government and puppet government. Because that's what Joe Biden was. The whole 21 and 25 was a puppet government, civil affairs, puppet government. And then you had your continuity government. And when you go read your military government handbooks and publications, which is what the Uniform Code of Military Justice stems on. And there's a great book. I tell people I don't make money on it. I didn't write it. This is what all the military intelligence, JAG, it's like the guru of military law. William Burkheimer. It's a great book for everybody to read and get a sense of, our military and how our military officers think. There's emergencies that President Trump can bring all military officers back. You've seen that with Executive Order 13912, which was a follow-up shortly after, not too long after September 2018, with Title 10 invocation. It's separate from a national emergency, because it's in an executive order. All right, a national emergency, if it would have been tied in there, it would have terminated it had it not been continued. But because it's a regular executive order, until those are revocated, they're still active. And so you're seeing all the military movements out there. When you saw Texas border, that was a proclamation way back. Proclamation, though, key. It's a proclamation, and there's your martial law, what you need right there. You need a proclamation by the president. All right, so President Trump did that February the 20th, 2019, Proclamation 9844. Now, if you went to Google, this is the average American. If you went to Google, you typed in Proclamation 9844, it'll tell you that Joe Biden, quote unquote, terminated it. Well, how in the heck were the National Guard at the border in February 2024? Well, Joe does not have a single Title 10, Title 32 funding anywhere from 21 to 25. So how were the National Guard deploying in Texas in 2024? And why was President Trump the face down there? That would have been a breach of national security. That would have been seditious acts to overthrow the government if he was a former. And then also military, we know you don't salute a former president. All right, you don't Trump. You don't do that to a former anything. You don't do that to even a former commander. All right, so there were so many visuals of that. So when you tie all those in, you weave all those in, and you get to the martial law, he needed a proclamation. That was a proclamation. It wasn't in a regular executive order. It was in a proclamation. It was a Title 10, which is federalization of the National Guard to active duty. And he used reserve components, heavily reserve components. Just another big deal. 1 million reserve components in the executive order from 2020, 13912. So martial law is one of those topics you'll hear a lot of veterans, older veterans especially, they'll butcher that. And they don't know the application of the law. They don't know the applications of what's taking place right now, specific to what's going on in Executive Order 13848. So those are already been declared. And then also your 1798 Aliens Act. Now, what's also cool about that is if you go back and read history, in 1800, they had abolished temporary at that time period, because it's a wartime act, they had abolished the seditious part of it. And then they call it the Aliens Enemies Act. Why did President Trump and the media call it the Aliens Enemies Act? They don't. They call it the 1798 Aliens Act, which is the same verbiage from 1798. All right. So they're not using the 1800 version. They're calling it the 1798, which still had attached the Seditious Act, which was where back then, if you were a journalist or even a regular civilian, you were writing against the government and you were writing against the military, false, anything, you were arrested. All right. And so those have been applied. Even a Democrat president applied that in the last 150 years and arrested all kinds of people. All right. So it's been used since then. And so people need to realize that first and foremost. So when you get into what can happen up to November, you know, you hear a lot of people in the past say, oh, we're not going to have an election this year. We're not going to have an election. And we had an election. We had an election. We've had an election. You know, President Trump and them are using a lot of these elections kind of like data and statistics do, because you can't just come at the American public with 1 or 2 or 3. It's kind of like, you know, NBA and professional baseball. Personally, I think they play too many games when they get to championship league, but 7 games, the best of 7 is a little bit too much. But then again, you know, it's kind of like back in the day, whenever they started with 1, people started going, well, 1's not enough. They play all these games. It comes down to 1. What if the other team? So they started adding 2 or 3. So they had to offset it. So here we are. We happen to have an offset of all this data to show to the people out there, because that target audience is the main key audience. It's not you, the patriot. It's the target audience. So those are the ones that they won't even believe a single word from a single sentence of a single paragraph of a single law. So you have to break down this. So I hate to use the word dumbly, but you have to use that because that's where the general American public are. So, you know, the general American public are not hearing terms and saying it's like, oh, we're not going to have an election and we're not going to. So it's typically in the patriot world. And what I do is I say, look, you don't want to be wrong about something. You want to be right. We'll take it one day at a time. And that's what I do with President Trump. It's because I'm not in a war room and I don't know what they planned way back when they planned it as far as the every intricate detail. So you take it one day at a time. And when you do that, well, you already have evidence of martial law because there's a proclamation with a Title 10 order in it way back in 2019. It's not been revocated. All right. No matter what Google tells you, you got to listen to President Trump. November, December, he put posts on True Social that every executive order, proclamation, national emergency, document, pardon by quote unquote Joe is hereby terminated. Ladies and gentlemen, if you go to Google and go to AI and utilize your new AI tool, and you go in there and you say, just hypothetically, if a president revocated every single national emergency, executive order, etc., all of them, executive action from the former president, what would that do? It tells you judicial and world chaos. You're not seeing world chaos right now if you know the laws and orders that are being applied and applicable to what President Trump's doing. So once you realize that, then it'll make more sense that, what I think they're going to do is not what even the general podcaster thinks, because they've been wrong up to this point as well. And it's not about being right or wrong in our world. It's just about getting it right. So I think if we take it one day at a time and work our way up, you're going to see what happens versus us sitting here speculating. But the martial law is already there. All the key executive orders are in place with the national emergencies and the military federalized. They're already federalized. They were not rescinded. Those orders were not terminated. They weren't rescinded. So we're still federalized. And if we need them, then naturally you'll see that. But I think too, if you overuse the military, it just depends. Because right now, the general public, the Republicans will be all right with it. But the liberals, they already hate our military. Now, I know what people would say. I'm with you. The heck with what they think. In another way, however, if the ultimate goal is for all of us to unify to the general public, then we can't help that they've been brainwashed their whole life as well off of whatever they were taught and how they were taught and who it was. We got to eradicate the ones that are evil, and then we also have to educate the ones who are willing to be educated. And as painful as that is, that's what I think they're doing, is a slow roll education. I don't think it's going to be anything crazy. And that's just me. I may be wrong, and I'm subject to be wrong because I'm human. But I don't think it's going to be anything wild and crazy like some people think. I think it's just going to be, like President Trump says, our success will be our revenge. Our success will be our retribution. And he's consistent with that. But that's just me. I may be wrong.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You've alluded to the fact that the martial law is in place, the executive orders and declarations are already enforced, and so forth and so on. And but the president has been pounding the pavement, if you will, for quite some time, and as recent as the address to the nation about the SAVE Act and how important that is to get passed. Of course, he's pounding the Democrats on that, and the Rhino Patriot imposters on our side of the aisle to cast the proper vote from the president's viewpoint, pass the act. Do you think
if I may
it'll
add on
pass?
that? I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say,
What's
I'll
that?
add on that. Well,
Yeah,
I was
go
going to
ahead.
say, I'll add on that is that, to the target audience out there, let's exclude the Patriots for a moment. To the target audience with the Save America Act, what people in the target audience, they think this is all real time. They really think that Congress is doing this and Congress in the chamber and they're meeting. That's not the case. Like, it's not. And here's how. And this is probably going to go to like I say, and alluding to me already cheating and reading the dialogue a little bit, but it also helps right here to bring that into play, is
Bring
the
it
fact
on.
that if Congress was real, and if Congress is in real time right now, then why didn't the 2021, 2022, and 2023 Democrat control House and Senate? I mean, people got to apply this now. Why didn't a full Democrat House and Senate terminate any single thing by President Trump with a Democrat president? What people thought Joe was real. Look, that's what people got to paint a picture. If this was real in all real time, then a Democrat president, a Democrat House, and a Democrat Senate couldn't terminate one single tariff, could not terminate one single Title 10, Title 32, anything by President Trump. Like, yeah, they could, ladies and gentlemen, because that's what they had done before in years past. They did all kinds of things all the time. They would unravel what the president had just done, and people over there going, "Why are you undoing this? What are you?" They didn't do any of that. So, see,
That's right.
it's all scripted, and if it's scripted to utilize the National Guard in a broader spectrum, great, because the federalization order is already there, and predominantly, majority of Republicans are going to be okay with it because, again, they do believe in fair elections, and it's pretty common sense. Let's just be honest. Anybody who don't want a fair election is because they can't win outright, as President Trump shows, and it's the same thing. It's the merit-based. Someone like me, if I want to run for office, then I should be there for the right reasons, field your questions, and also field your questions always, and then also walk that walk, and then have an office that looks like a glass box, right? I should be there for the right reasons. And so, if most Americans would be okay with the National Guard moving in if they had to like that, if it was more visual based, whatnot. But it's all scripted also, waking up that public out there, engaging that
Yes.
public, also getting
Mhm.
feedback on that. You and I, we know this. You look at your analytics. Everybody looks at analytics to see what demographics follow me. Is it more female based, more male based? Who is it? What age brackets are they? That's what they do with elections and everything else. That's how they can get a synopsis of who is and who isn't going to vote and whatnot. Same thing with ticket sales or anything else out there in the world. You have analytics now and you study that. And so that's what the president and them are doing. They're trying to get that engagement. And that's why you heard President Trump and different people saying, call your congressman, and you tell them that, well, they're trying to see how many people are calling, right? That's what the American public are supposed to do. Like, if you're whining, complaining, griping, well, if you're not following up with the reciprocality side of that, then you're, again, whining, griping. It's falling on deaf ears because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is calling your congressman. Now, I know that it's a theater and it's an operation, but at the same time, for the ones that don't know that, it's getting them to see, hey, when this operation is done, this is what it's supposed to look like in the future, right? This is what had been forgotten in the past. People just kept doing what? Trusting their senator, congressman, local representative, state representative, just because they'd always been around. You've always seen their name. You've always seen their signs. Oh, they go to this church or whatever it is. People put too much trust in them versus always holding them accountable and then knowing what they're supposed to be doing. And that's what happened. So, that's what I think about the Save America Act. It's already scripted this way. So a lot of this is engagement. A lot of this is analytics. And then a lot of it is also getting people just to be involved and teaching them that's your future, right? And then also, we got to get these young kids involved. I mean, we're talking about college. They're still partying predominantly. They're still going to college for the wrong reasons. They're not there. They think when they leave high school, they just got to do certain things. And we got to get those generations back homed in and focused on what matters in the world versus what they're doing right now, because that's the future. It's not you and I. We're not the future. We're going to live in it, but we're not the future. Those are the ones that's going to, when you and I are way on up in age, they're going to be the ones tampering and in the hands of whatever we have at that moment, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, whatever it is, they're going to be the ones running that. And it's kind of like, I want to know what my doctor, when I do need a doctor, I want to know what he was doing the night before. I don't want to find out that he was out partying all night, running the line of cocaine somewhere, and then, oh, here I am. Let's open heart surgery today, right? So it's kind of like that. It's the same thing. We got to bring accountability back, responsibility back, and then also, all the other things that come with your roles, your duties, etc. We got to bring all that back, and it goes back to the 2.3 million versus the 1.8%. The 1.8% we're fighting. What were the others doing? It still always goes back to you and I are the ones, and other people listening are doing what they're supposed to be doing in their communities. But if we always stay in a small number, sure, we may be able to get it done. But if that bigger number don't start pulling their weight where they're supposed to pull their weight, I mean, it won't last long.
Yes, thank you. You raised a great point about the youth. Extremely important, because they're going to be in control. What we've all been doing in these last 10 years and the years to come is critically important. But if the youth, as they pick up that torch and carry it forward, it's extremely important. We're going to close out our broadcast with a clip from the president and just get your commentary on the media in a moment. But before we do, I want to just briefly touch on the subject of justice. As I loosely throw some darts at the marker board, they arrested Comey. They went through the process there. It's unfortunately, playing out, at least seemingly, in the civilian courts, which is why seemingly nothing's getting done. But you've got Comey, you've got the whole FISA abuse, you've got the clearly now this declassification, the rock solid evidence that the FISA reports and the misuse of that, the Steele dossier, the whole Russia hoax, all under the Commander-in-Chief and Executive President Barack Hussein Obama's watch. All of that, those FBI guys that I've just alluded to, we know the names, Brennan, Clapper, Comey, the rest of them, all of that. And in this deep declassification that covers that and far more, one, of course, and most of our audiences wants us to discuss this, justice. Okay, so my question to you is, with the judicial branch and the Justice Department of the United States right now, bought, paid for, completely corrupt, swearing an oath all this time to the bar, not the Constitution. We're talking about our attorneys and judges. The entire system, nobody, and justifiably so, has any faith or confidence in justice on the civilian side. So the question is, having unwrapped all of that, has justice been served and will be revealed? And will justice be served for what hasn't been yet? And will it, in the majority of it, take place in JAGs and military tribunals versus the bought, paid for Bar Association corrupt civilian side?
Oh, absolutely. Because again, that's probably the biggest part of President Trump's legacy right there, right? Because that's the whole point of why a billionaire would come out of his lifestyle status, right, to take on the real assassination attempts, not the special operations side of what we use in tactics and whatnot. That's in our unconventional warfare, which is what Butler, PA was, and then also at Trump International down there at golf course. But in a real, nobody's going to come out of a billionaire. You may have been a millionaire, but like, this could up my ante a little bit. Not a billionaire. You would not do that. So it shows the escalator was pre-planned. And then also, that's one of those things, like if I was putting myself in President Trump's seat and I was a billionaire, and I could fly anywhere in the world I wanted to, I could do anything I wanted, play golf all day, have a gorgeous wife, gorgeous family, just the life, right? Well, I would be like, you know what? I could be on Mount Rushmore one day. I could do something for God and my country, my family. And when you're a businessman who prides yourself on the art of the deal, well, that's the ultimate deal, right? It doesn't matter how strategic it was, because every business plan, any business person, especially me with an MBA, every business plan, ain't many people who can wing going into a board meeting. There's not many people wing some form of product or service and or both and wing it and just be like, just on the fly, and then it be successful. There's always strategies. That's why I write all the time. That's why I was, went off on the weave earlier. I should have written it down, because that's what I do. I write it down and say, okay, well, here's my key talking points and whatnot to stay on the concise time measure. But little things like Comey is a great example. If everyone here is over 40 and listening, especially if you're in your 50s and 60s, if you'll remember painfully go back and remember of old media, right? The mainstream media, and go back to those days when it was mudslinging. It was Republican on Republican, Democrat on Democrat, and it was just that was true chaos, right? Because that was when you should have been like, oh, I don't know who to trust here, because it would be Republican on Republican, Democrat on Democrat. It's somewhat been that a little bit throughout this process, because it's the draining of the swamp, and the applications of law shows that. And there's a divider line that specifically shows that. And once you learn those laws and orders that President Trump's using, and then study it, comprehend it, then you'll be able to see it. Until you do that, you won't see it. But those who have, you'll know what I'm talking about, is Comey. If you have 1.1 million followers on any platform out there, and you're being falsely accused of something, especially if you can talk about it, and in any court situation, you're not always under an NDA. There's some things you can discuss out there. You can be like, I'm innocent, this is a lie, I'm going to prove it. You can say something's out there. Comey hasn't posted on his X account in over a year. So it shows you right there that, hey, if this guy was free roaming and or the people out there, nothing's taking place, nothing's happening. Those people, then why isn't this guy posted? At least, even if he hates social media all of a sudden, he'd be out there taking. Same thing with Obama. Like, there's a time and a place when you just got to fight for your lady. Right? If you a man, you claim to be a man. I'm a big burly man. I'm a man. I'm a gruff man. There's a time you got to fight for your wife. I'm pretty sure that time is whenever this big burly guy, muscled up dude, right, sweaty, muscled up, bikini shorts basically, but UFC fighters, so they're not bikini shorts anymore. He takes his microphone and he's like, Michelle Obama's a dude. I'm pretty sure that's a time when Obama should take to social media and be like, hey, my wife's not a dude. My wife is a woman. She's more of a woman than any other woman. He should be saying something, no matter what Republicans, conservatives still believe, because they're not the target audience. The target audience are the Democrats and the liberals out there losing their minds, going, oh my God, this guy. Oh, yeah. And then they'll say, oh, Obama's got more class. That's why he's not responding. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, that's when you respond. Your wife being called a dude, you respond. All right. And every lady out there, you should want your man to fight for you. So when you go to those things and you look at it strategic base, it's engagement. It's an algorithm base. It's to get engagement. So to say, oh, will there be justice? Absolutely, because that's how you flip the equation. And it's also the whole point of why President Trump quotes laws and orders. You can't be quoting laws and orders if you're not going to apply every aspect of it, which is treason, crimes against humanity, sedition, espionage, and all the other things that we've seen broken for many years. So in order to reset that and to set the bar high again, to go, okay, well, here's what's going to happen if you break this, or if you do this, you're caught doing this, or if you got to show the punishment for that. And you got to put the fear of God back into people, as that saying is out there. You got to show them that, hey, this is the repercussion of your sin. This is your repercussion of doing this action right here, especially behind the American people. Same thing today. They put a White House put up that 160, I think it was, Democrats voted against the abolishing of the insider trade. Right? They voted against the Insider Trade Act. That's perfect. That's not real time. That's a part of one of the strategies I'm talking about, to shame those Democrats and who they are, right? That brings public shame to them, especially the more you empower yourself on what's going on lawfully. If you were someone sitting on the fence, God love you, and you're trying, God love you, that's what you're here for, then that's to publicly shame them, because who wouldn't want that? It's the same thing with voting fraud again. Who wouldn't want a free and fair election to let two people, let's say like me and Guardian Daniel, or me and Rob Cunningham, or me and Lieutenant Colonel Bosey, if we were running against each other, hey, may the best man win. May the best minds win. May the best brains win. That's what everybody should want, right? And then you let the people decide on who they connect with, or who they think is the best leader moving forward. And then the one who loses will gracefully bow out in another way, going, hey, tip my hat. The best man won, best woman won, whatever, right? Kudos. So the only way to flip this whole scenario and to make President Trump stand apart from everything else, divide a line in the sand and flip everything, is to reveal that, is to show the punishment of that. And now I'm not rooting for it from the standpoint, I'm trying to tell people, look, in military law, it's heavily geared upon prevention. Prevent. All right, what a lot of patriots right now are doing are wanting to see people hanging from gallows. Now, you can't root from that from another angle, because the same people on the other side want to see President Trump hanging from the gallows. You gotta flip your terminology around. Should there be punishment? Absolutely. All right, but you also got to take responsibility for what you allowed to take place. Now, it may not have been you specifically, and only you know that listening out there. You only know who you are, how much you've contributed, and what you're reading, studying, applying in your life, and where you are in your communities, your families, etc. However, majority of Americans are the ones who have allowed this. They've allowed the swamp to grow, flourish, thrive, etc. So everybody has to take responsibility at some point and be like, all right, you know what? You don't want to do it, then even though I know I did, but I'll say it's my fault. It's my fault. For shame on you for letting you think this way. Shame on me for letting you think this way. And shame on you, though, for not knowing what you're supposed to know. But we all take responsibility. Then you go back to the executive order I was saying earlier. EO 13977. That's the protection order for the judges, the lawyers, prosecutors, and law enforcement and their families. That order was not revocated by that quote unquote Democrat president and that quote unquote Democrat House and Democrat Senate. And then not a single Obama, Bush, an appointed judge try to terminate a tariff anytime. And of course, the judges wouldn't terminate it, but they never try to block it. All right, so all of a sudden, the tariffs are detrimental to the society now and the burden of the American people right now. But they weren't from 21 to 25. So see, you got to come with that consistency. And see, that's the part that's playing into this. So absolutely, all these judges right now that are going against President Trump, they're all district judges. And then you got to go back to what was ruled upon last summer in 2025. Supreme Court ruled 6-3. A single district judge could not rule against the president couldn't put any injunction out there on something that was universal based. Well, that's every bit of what these federal judges have been going against President Trump. It's always on something that is universal based. So they're sitting there going against their own system. They're going against their own high court. So see, that's exposure for the people out there to read it from that angle. Not for you to always, oh my God, this judge did it. No. Change your thinking. You can't do that anymore. You got to elevate and empower yourself. What they're doing is showing you the judges that are going against their own high court system, and they're showing their allegiance to what used to be. Now, it's still theater, but they got to show that to the target audience, the general public, who still sees it from a live standpoint. And then also hope that they go, that's a contradiction. That's hypocrisy, right? You're supposed to be a judge at one of the highest levels in the judicial system, and you're going against the Supreme Court that ruled back here, right, 6-3, that you're not supposed to do this, and here you are abusing your power, abusing your seat, weaponizing your seat to go against this one person, president figure that you don't like. The other thing is, in a situation like some of these things that they're ruling on, if it were real time, here's another way you can look at it. If it were a real time situation, a lot of these things these judges are going against President Trump on would be one of those sayings that if you lay low and let it pass over, this too shall pass. They love using Christian Bible verses, so they should take advice and lay low, because if President Trump would be done in a little over 2 years, then they don't have long to wait to go back in and recall this habit, which shows there won't be a habit. Because if they were going to do anything, it should have been that same libtard judge back here from 21 to 25. It didn't take place. Right? So it shows people just, change your way of thinking. And that's why a guy like me gets you into a regular thinking and unconventional thinking, get you out of your conventional, get you out of your regular, and come over here to see that, look, if it were real, then they should have done it way back here when they all had the power and authority. And then also, if you think that you believe them, and not that you believe them from the standpoint, but if you believe that was real, then they're the ones screaming that President Trump, again, is destroying democracy, and he's destroying the fabric of America and all these other things. He didn't do that in 2025. If he destroyed America, it was 2017 to 2021. So why didn't they undo anything by President Trump? They didn't. So see, that's the stuff that could show people that, hey, what you're watching is theater. These judicial system, 2017 to 2021 was a resetting of the legislative branch. The unique PEADs, the unique laws, unique orders invoked during that time period set up what took place in 21 to 25 and right now. But then 21 to 25 was a resetting of the executive branch for the first time in U.S. history, and also FEMA and Department of Homeland Security. For the first time, there's a publication put out. They posted January the 1st, but it published January the 15th. FEMA, Department of Homeland Security, reconstitution of the executive branch. Ladies and gentlemen, the word reconstitution means to take something out of its state it's in right now and put it back to its original state. A reconstitution of the executive branch means that the president's seat and the vice president's seat is about to be from whatever, which we know is a deep state, back to the original executive seat it's supposed to be. Now you're witnessing 2025 to 2029, the resetting of the judicial branch. This is all Declaration of Independence being applied, resetting. That's why it's judge, 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 court, 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 Supreme Court this, first circuit. First Circuit this, Second Circuit that, Third Circuit this, District Judge this. It's all judge, court. And that's what they're doing to the public out there. This is all resetting. And once you see that 40,000 foot view of the legislative branch, executive branch, judicial branch, they're all putting that order for a reason. Right? Pass the laws, enforce the laws, and then also interpret the laws. All right, so if you'll look at our history and look at our founders put those in a sequence for a reason, but they're all co-equal with each other. They're not supposed to overshadow each other. But that's what the judicial branch has done all these past years. The judicial and legislative took over the executive. All right, and that's why they call it a reconstitution, because they're resetting that. They're going, hey, yes, a president can declare war without Congress. You might want to go read some military government handbooks. All right, and the Constitution supports that, Article 2. So if the president, the vice president's doing what they're supposed to be doing, Congress doing what they're supposed to be doing, they'll all be on the same page, versus what everybody's witnessed for the past however long you've been living. So you got to know how our founders meant it too. They're all co-equal with each other, but you and I, we vote in our representatives, we vote in our president, and then the president nominates the judge, the Senate confirms the judge. So whenever you and I have a president like President Trump, who's enforcing the law correctly and lawfully, all right, there's no question. He don't need interpretation. They have to keep their mouth shut because he's doing exactly what we voted him in for, and the Congress would be doing what they're doing. And if they needed any kind of interpretation, if they needed it, see, that's where judges are also being exposed. President Trump hasn't gone to the, hey, what do you think about this? And hey, would you rule on this? Will you take this? We're having judges just out of the blue giving their 2 cents. That is not how it's supposed to work, ladies and gentlemen. The president nominates them based on what we voted him in for. It'll be his, obviously, subjective standpoint and what he thinks fits what we wanted as the people. And then he nominates them, and then the Senate confirms them. And then that's what the judicial system is supposed to replicate. You haven't seen that. And until people that we vote in those 2 portions, and then legislative branch, they write and pass the laws, executive branch enforces them, and then judicial interprets. Until we have that, it's going to look like it's looked. And that's why President Trump, you got to get engagement everywhere. Call your senator, call your congressman, call your state reps, call your this, right? But then everybody's supposed to be back here learning this again, relearning it, because that's what everybody's witnessing. It's not real time, but it is to the target audience out there. And that's what they're doing, is they're cleaning out this swamp right in front of them. But everybody time to catch up, learn how it's supposed to work, how it's supposed to operate. And if I may, I know I'm long-winded on this one, but the birthright citizenship is a perfect example. In the proper terminology, the Supreme Court did exactly what they were supposed to do. President Trump said they should, the birthright citizenship is this. Well, the Supreme Court takes it, even though they took it out of line, if you will. But this is a good. They take it, they interpreted it as it sits on paper. So they ruled correctly. Ruling on base how it was written in 1868. Now, the wrong Republican and conservative hear me say that, and even patriot, and say, oh, I can't believe you said that. No, they ruled correctly. They're reading exactly how it was written in 1868 and interpreting it the way it was applied then. So it's up to the legislative branch to take that birthright citizenship and go, all right, this was written in 1868. It was applied to 1868. It was applied to what was going on with the Civil War. And we don't need that anymore. So that is the legislative branch role and duty and responsibility, is to go in there and either amend it or abolish it. And that is how it's supposed to be done. So see, when all these Republicans, conservatives, and patriots out there got mad at the Supreme Court a couple of weeks back, you were directing your aim at the wrong people. It is the straight up role and duty of the legislative branch to go in there and amend and abolish something that don't apply to us anymore. So see, it goes back to establishing those roles and duties and responsibilities the way our founders established it, which, even if you want to joke about wearing wigs again, every bit of what they did back then is very applicable to right now. It has nothing to do with where we are and who we are and how we dress and how we operate, air conditioned, no air conditioned, wagon, Corvette, none of that. Every bit of their ideologies And every bit of what they wrote back then without technology can be applied right now with technology. And it still works the same way. And it's genius. And that's why we're the greatest nation in the world. That's why we'll always be that way, as long as you have people like you and I who think that way.
Thanks a lot, Derek. You unpacked quite a bit there and given our viewers an opportunity to connect the dots on so many important issues. And I want to pedal back to two quick things. And we're going to close out with a clip from the president and get your commentary on the media. Um, we started off talking about James Comey. Well, he was certainly quite active on his social media account when he decided to display 8647. And then to your point, he miraculously disappears for the last year, duly noted. Also, your connectivity on BHO and Big Mike, same scenario there. Defend your woman when your woman is publicly attacked. We're talking about a former, well, not officially, but I think our audience understands, a former first lady who gets surprise attack live before a large audience on the White House lawn on an event hosted by our commander-in-chief and sitting president Donald Trump, who all of a sudden out of nowhere in the UFC 250 states, Michelle Obama is a man, am I right, America? By the way, folks, we unpacked Big Mike, no pun intended, in the last month's global defense war with Derek and the rest of our panel members. You might want to go visit that just out of knowledge and a lot of fun. But anyway, your points are well taken that Barack Obama has not defended his spouse, if you will. And I think the Big Mike narrative gets shown to everybody officially at some point in time, just like our election theft has just been done by our president. That takes us to this clip. Let's run the clip to our producer, President Donald J. Trump, on media, and we'll have Derek comment on it and close out our broadcast.
In a rare move, NBC and ABC Fake News have both said that they would not cover this speech. They knew what it was about because of the fact that they don't like the topic, because they know how corrupt our system is and they don't want to reveal it. They and others in the media are part of a plot. They want to continue this fraud for whatever reason. They want to keep it going. They want to protect the radical left. They can't have a great country, and that's true. You can't have a great country without free and fair elections. Fraud like this should mean a revocation of their licenses. They use our public multi-billion-dollar in value airways for absolutely no money. They pay nothing. All we want is honesty in our elections and honesty in reporting. They pay nothing for multi-billion-dollar assets.
You know, this is such an important segment of that address, that quote nothing burger, which brings us back to how we started our broadcast. The media, I'd like you to comment on the codes I invoked, U.S. Section Code 2384 and 2385, as it relates to the media's role over these, well, forever, but certainly over these last 10 years since President Trump has arrived on the scene. And the president has raised that issue in the address. They did not broadcast it live, and I'm not sure if they went and restreamed it later on. But what's your take on where this leads to for the mainstream media and the violations of 2384 and 2385? Can you unpack some of that and anything else regarding the media as it relates to the operation that we're engaged in presently?
Well, that goes back to 45, 47 being a strategic and special operation, knowing this from day one. You know, when you think about TV, I say this all the time, and a lot of patriots, they quit listening. I watch my viewership drop all the time when I talk about country music. You know, people claim to be country music fans, but they never choose who they support. They think they do. That's what they call an illusion of choice. It's called a managed democracy, where they give you the buffet, and because there's maybe 12 items on the buffet, and you don't like maybe 7 of them, but you like the other 5, then you think because you made that choice on 5 that you were in control of that, and you weren't, right? So it's the same thing when you talk about politics. When you have something so big, and we're talking about 350 million people in the United States of America, and all these different broadcasts are hitting at least half of those. You got to take an effect, obviously, as we know, nursing homes and certain things that, you know, the people who are not in the right mind. But the majority of Americans have TV in their homes. And so when you have someone up there, just for sheer whatever it may be, because they've been bought on the back end or whatever it is, they just hate because they hate. There's all kind of variables out there for hatred and all kinds of things out there, people being, bought and paid for. So whatever it is and whoever it applies to, when you think of the effect that TV has on people and what they listen and believe, and then their attention spans. See, this is where the attention span comes in real heavily. This is also why the emergency alert comes in real heavy as well. It's because we have so many people who, if it's not in 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes on a full max, and that's pushing it, they won't listen to it. I remember when I first, started going on shows 4 years ago and whatnot, and when I call them the IQ of an empty peanut hull, when those people started opening up their chatter boxes, oh, this guy can't say this in under 20 minutes. It's all a bunch of air. That's the problem with America, is that they want to whine and complain and gripe and fuss about a problem that we could go over 150 years. Well, let's just cap it at 150 years with the Organic Acts of 1871 and what all happened since then. We're talking about 150 years worth of problems, but they want a 5-minute answer and solution. So it's no different than wanting a filet mignon, but you want to put it in a regular little tiny little microwave. You want a 5-star steak from a microwave, and that's our problem in America. So the time you get to NBC, ABC, and PBS and NPR and all these people, there has to be a wartime order there, and there is. And when you think about these orders that have been in place all these years, a lot of these were put into place by the actual people who are whining and complaining. Now, I know it's theater, and I know it's an operation, but for the people who don't, it has to be played this way. So most of these people who have whined, complained, and gripe, but especially on the Democrat levels of senators and congressmen, people voted on these things in their past, in their years, so especially the ones that are older than Methuselah, like the real Joe Biden, and then your Nancy Pelosi's and people who've been around for ages, right? So a lot of these voted on certain things. Schumer, they were all about border when it was benefiting their residuals on the backside. So it goes back to that smoke and screen that they put on the front, and they'll use the terms, laws, and orders on the front. But what were they doing on the back? Same thing with defense contractors, lobbyists that President Trump said were ending. In one of his recent speeches, outlined that as well. And it's promises made, promises kept for the Republican conservatives, but this is a strategic operation. So it goes back to a national emergency. It was the Congress who made it in 73. They overrode President Nixon with a 2/3 override off of his veto. They go in and they pass the War Powers Resolution. Back then, they call it a resolution. It was so controversial that they had to go back in, I think it was in 77, and add the word act to it because it's so controversial to even some Democrats back then. So when you look at what they did in 73, and they made it to where a president had to declare a national emergency to utilize the military. Well, there you go right there. That goes back to what we were talking about earlier. That is straight up violation of the Constitution, one, and then also that judicial and legislative overshadow and overpowered that executive again. Well, the reason why that's key is because that national emergency comes with those 120 statute powers. And one of those is regulating commerce, and one of those is restricting telecommunications. Well, restricting telecommunications, that's 47 U.S. Code Section 606, which is a wartime power only, all right, which is what you're witnessing right now. So President Trump doing that there, that's for the target audience again, for the general public that has no idea what's going on. That's for them to hear another segment and also the strategic names of NBC and ABC. So he's already hammered CNN. He's already hammered The View, Fallon, Kimmel, you name it. He's already mentioned them specifically by name. The View is still under investigation, FCC investigation, which, again, there'll be some revelation of that in the future. So all this is already strategic. But when you go back to the 1798 Aliens Act, again, who upheld that? The Supreme Court did. Now, that's a wartime order only. And it also goes back to what I was saying. They didn't call it the Aliens Enemies Act, which it's commonly known as now. They're saying specific terms of the 1798 Aliens Act, which, again, 1798, not 1800, when they got rid of the sedition portion. Well, the sedition portion is very key, which comes into 2384 and 2385, the Seditious Acts to Overthrow a Government. Well, President Trump, 2017, what they first start doing? FBI, CIA, all the three-letter agencies he started hammering, and that they weaponized against the American public. Well, how did they do that? They didn't do that by pamphlets. They didn't do that by books. Those were small scales, but they didn't do it on the massive scale. The massive scale was media, because people are glued to their TVs. They will absolutely watch news for 5 or 10 minutes on a TV or a phone. They're not coming to you and I because you and I are too much work. The true patriots are coming to you and I because it's work and they love it and they want to know the real brass facts. I call it the brass knuckles, right? Because it takes work and it takes empowering yourself, reading, studying, comprehension, reading, studying, comprehension. And depending on who you are, it may take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. It depends on who you are, but it may take numerous times. So the general public are sitting on their phones 24/7 right now, and they'll home in on. I know people who only watch me; they won't watch me on your show, and it's not anything to do with me or you. It's just they're loyal to some other host, right? Well, that shows you right there another example that people will absolutely home in on what they're comfortable with, or what they resonate with, or maybe it's how it's presented to them, and that's okay in some ways, but in another way, it's also finicky. Meaning like, oh, well, so-and-so's got a better background and this, that, and the other, and I just like how they deliver better. They could be delivering to you chocolate-covered marbles. I mean, the chocolate may be real, but when you get down to it and you try to bite down and you hit that marble and it ain't raspberry field or something like that, then what, right? So it goes back to President Trump, the way you got to flip all this, that the mainstream media weaponized against people way back. What they're doing right now is not doing that. So they got to bring people back to engagement, back to the verbal engagement, disengagement, and get people active and involved. And then you find out who the patriots are, right? You find out the ones out there who are getting it and who aren't. And it goes back to President Trump and this whole operation. There's going to be a revelation. There's going to be a finale. There's going to be a revealing of the 45, 47. They're already doing that in so many ways. But he's going to go in history books for that. So there is going to be an end to this per se, even though it's not going to end from the standpoint of work. But there's going to be an end to it, meaning disclosure, and then punishment levels of what people see. But in another way, it's not going to be an end, meaning like our work's going to continue. You're going to know how to apply it. You're going to know who is and who was and who ain't. You're going to know those things from that nature. And I think it's going to be like an 80-20 rule. I think 20% are just going to always be over here, but that's better than it being the polar opposite, right? What we've always seen, and it's really been that way. And then Dan Scavino will tell you, don't let the 10% make you think they're the 90. Well, we're not there anymore. Like that truly what people are seeing, X is captured. Most of it's negative, but it's captured. The blue checks and the Palantir and all the different organizations that are working with the Space Force, et cetera, and then the data and what they're collecting and who it is and who it ain't. So they got to bring everybody back down. And you got to get back down to, people thinking for themselves. We can't have multiple people out there just saying what they want to say, but especially when it comes to mainstream market. And so there's got to be a revolution in that. And that's what everybody's seeing right now. NPR and PPS and all that. That was 2024 again, like I said earlier. If Joe Biden was real, Kamala, the DNC, and all their big money donors, why didn't they save two of their most biggest liberal markets out there? When you go to NPR now and PBS, first thing will pop up is this little pop-up, and it's a donate thing. They need donations, which shows they're thriving a little, maybe on what was left of their logbook, but they're being hammered monetarily back here, what was funding them. And that's one thing President Trump didn't allude to in that video, which he doesn't have to. He's done it before in the past, but he talks about, hey, you're seeing the host, but who's back here funding it? Who's running these back here? right? The people that no one sees, the same thing I talk about when I talk about my music podcast, where most of the audience drops off because they hear music and they don't want to lose their music, but they're not seeing that, hey, these people back here, you don't know who the publishers are, you don't know who the major record label executives are, you don't know who all these people are, and they all tie into the same thing. They all tie into NBC, ABC, and they're all a big system in the market together. And that's why President Trump has highlighted some singers that most people will be like, I don't know about that. But they're predominantly not bought by the system. They're not bought by the establishment. That's why he's also hammered others that are bought by the establishment, your Taylor Swifts and different people. Now, Taylor Swift could be playing a role too. I tell people always be open, because when you have someone that global and that big, they could also be playing a role too, because they have such a big market that they can flip and start saying, oh, I love President Trump, he's done this, that. And then all of a sudden, she's not going to lose her billions of audience. So there's always these key strategies and plays in it. And it's just a matter of where President Trump is right now. And all this is just bringing two more names to the market. It also riled up all the people it was supposed to rile up. But if you're a patriot, you sit back there going, that's Title 47. And they're showing the mainstream audience out there this, that, and other. So, it's all part of it. But there will be a revelation, absolutely, because that's part of his legacy. And that's what brings the house down, as the saying is. Your weaponized media, and then also the global market of what they're doing with trade, defense contractors, and lobbyists. So they all go together. Your big, massive market systems that come crumbling down.
Thank you, Derek. The Taylor Swift commentary there, we'll see how that plays out, but your point is well taken. Nicki Minaj might be a good example of the mechanics that you were defining potentially with Taylor Swift. I want to pedal back a couple of quick comments that I'm going to make on the media, and then we're going to close out the broadcast in the next few minutes with two quick questions. But pedaling back to this media situation, in my view, we've been witnessing since the escalator, certainly right up to present time, and more to come, the decapitation and self-implosion at the same time of the mainstream media apparatus. Number one. Number two, we have we're going to be witnessing, in my opinion, over time, and there'll be two triggering events that'll put this into motion, and that is what would I call it? A podcaster flush out. We'll call it like that. And then we have certainly, as you well know, Derek, the media center that is ready to go down there in camp, whatever they call it, holiday down there, the Caribbean Spa at Gitmo. The media center is going to change everything. I think you'll begin to see the podcast to flush out at that point. So you got decapitation of the mainstream media, podcast to flush out coming to a theater near you. We've got Media Center at Gitmo, which will be giving us information straight from the horse's mouth. We see Catherine Herridge resurfacing. And then we have, of course, the ultimate weapon, and that's the EAS, EBS, more particularly, that will unite and bring things together in terms of bringing truth to the world and the American people. So that's my commentary on 2384, 2385, taken to the next level there. We covered this, but there's two last things. This comes from the public, narratives that they have. And you've already addressed them in this broadcast, but we'll be very succinct with a quick answer, particularly on the first question, yes or no here, and then you can expand a little bit on the follow-up and last question. Can non-military citizens be processed at Gitmo? Answer.
Yes.
Thank you. And you covered that early, but we want to, cap that out here, bookend that on this broadcast. Let's put that to bed out there for folks. And also, again, you spoke about it earlier that the deep state is dead. Yet other folks in our movement, folks we hobnob with, if you want to use that term, in our media space, that have somewhat, perhaps seemingly a counter narrative to that the deep state is in fact very much alive, and we're still combating these things. And I think our audience would be on both sides of that narrative. No, yes, the deep state has been neutered. But at the same time, some folks are saying, well, yeah, we see all these things happening. Clearly, the deep state will be around for a while. While these things can be broken down, if I bring the other folks on and ask them, right now I have you here. What's your simplistic points of clarification? Um, the deep state being gone or the deep state not being gone? How can you bring some clarity to that subject as we wrap up this broadcast?
Well, people like Michael Jaco and different people that I'm on with and different things. Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. So many people have different audiences, right? That and it's
Mhm.
whether you want it or not per se. Of course, we don't look at really who follows us. There's no way for me to know. I've met a lot of people who do across the country. I've met a lot of people who write and whatnot and write to me, but as far as that goes, the broader picture, when you get up into the million of followers and whatnot, there's no way to know everybody. And then we can kind of get a synopsis like I know 85% of my demographic are females because it takes reading, studying, and comprehension, but multitasking with all I bring to the table. And that's not knocking anyone out there as far as that goes with the audience and who's listening, who isn't. And that's not knocking other colleagues of mine, especially veterans, because veterans, we have a unique way of talking with each other in the first place. And there's ways that we can banter with each other and we know we're not being, like real. We're being real in another way, but we're not being serious. But at the same time, it goes back to being who you are and then sticking to what you're good at. And Jaco and Lieutenant Colonel Bosey, Colonel Sellers, all the ones that I know personally. Um, everybody has their specialty. One, Jaco being a Navy SEAL, first off, that is a whole other elite class of tough and gruff and also thinking, improvising and whatnot. And then you got Lieutenant Colonel Bosey and Colonel Sellers, people who are special operations, Army, etc. But when it comes to application of laws and orders of what President Trump's doing, when you look at it, it goes back to identifying a problem or an issue. Like if you're even in business, if you have something that you can't meet your goal or your mission, then you got to go, well, what is our problem? You got to be able to identify the problem. Well, if President Trump was a problem to the Democrats, and if he was a problem to the liberals, then they suck at identifying their problem. But not only do they suck at it, this is how you apply that the deep state's not there anymore. Is President Trump did not become a problem in 2025. He didn't become a king, a dictator, and a Nazi in 2025. I always say, let's roll with their rhetoric. Let's play hypothetical. I hate hypotheticals, but let's just play it. Let's just go ahead and say that President Trump is a king, a dictator, and a Nazi. Let's be a Democrat for a moment. As painful as it is, let's do it. Well, President Trump didn't become that in 2025. He's not destroying democracy in 2025, 2026. He's not. If he was doing any of those things, he did that 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and then up to what people thought of the quote unquote inauguration of Joe. All right, so then you got to go look at all of what he did. What was unique? There are unique executive orders for national emergencies. We're not talking about just regular executive orders and regular national emergencies. There are unique executive orders with national emergencies that can even paint a picture that there are PEADs back here somewhere that will correlate with those as well, because these were not your usual executive orders with national emergencies. They were executive orders with national emergencies and proclamations that federalized the reserves and the National Guard. In order for the National Guard, especially the National Guard, those are very key, because right now the libtards in the normal sector, even just regular liberals who are just people, right? Those are complaining that President Trump's abusing his power, putting the National Guard in city streets, and that's against the law and it's against the Constitution. No, it is not. It is in Joint Publication 3-57. All right, and it tells that Constitution and Congress that generally you don't want to use the Title 10 forces with law enforcement. But unless what? There's a but there. Unless Congress or Constitution. President Trump's done that. And the Congress Now, this is where you use your 21, 22, 23, even though I know it was an operation, and there's continuity government, puppet government, whole of government, and all those strategies that law most certainly outlines did take place. Executive Order 13961, which is your federal mission resilience strategy, which is your continuity government invocation by President Trump. The most recent order of succession within the Department of War right now was December the 10th, 3 days after that in 2020. That's the most recent. And every other president in United States history has had an order of succession with every military domain, but especially the Department of War, except for quote unquote Joe. So when you take in, and let's play devil's advocate for a moment, let's just pretend it was all real. 21 to 2023, there's not a single revocation of anything of President Trump when they had a Democrat president, Democrat House, and Democrat Senate. The tariffs are still in place. All right. President Trump on the debate with quote unquote Joe, did you notice he didn't take my tariffs out? Well, the border. All right. So President Trump is this dictator, right? He's this threat and all these other things. All right. They went after him for some financial stuff and a hooker. Those are all, just verbiage. It's not something they could prove. Financial records, well, they're going against their own laws with that. The deep state have passed laws years ago about that, where you can't do this to a president, you can't look at this, you can't look at that, can't. So that's hypocritical. But the hooker, and I use that loosely on purpose for a reason, is because a slang term sometimes that jars people and they get some thinking more. Well, if you wanted to get rid of President Trump, you wanted to ban him, bar him, you really hated this guy, like they claim they do, and they claim that, oh, he's a threat and he's destroying this, and you don't know the real Trump and he's doing it. Okay, well, guess what? They had two major federal scenarios that they could have done straight out the gate that you witnessed, every one of you witnessed. February 2024, they had John Bolton, one on CNN, talking about a third term. He wasn't asked about a third term. He was asked about a second term. The same time period that John Bolton's talking about a third term, that's all visuals of what was going on in Texas. All right. The only Title 10 order in place up to that moment that was specific to do with the southern border, even though you can tie in the Executive Order 13912 from March 2020, it had a Title 10 in there as well. But specifically to the southern border, if we just want to get specific, Proclamation 9844 from February the 20th, 2019. So if quote unquote Joe revocated that, which Google will tell you, but the Federal Register don't do that, none of that does it. So but let's just play devil's advocate again. If that was revocated and the National Guard was told to stand down and we're calling off this order, then why were they still at the border? All right. And so then when President Trump went down there in February, same time John Bolton sitting there talking about the third term, President Trump's the only person who was seen at the border with the governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, and the adjutant general of Texas. All right. That would have been a breach of national security and a seditious act to overthrow the government if President Trump was a former president. All right. And the whole visual, the flip side of it is the governor and the adjutant general. The adjutant general reports to the governor, the state chief executive, unless the National Guard are federalized by Title 10 by the chief executive, your commander-in-chief. All right. They gave everybody a rank structure visual there. They showed President Trump walking what we call in the Army and the military a FOB, a forward operating base, all right, where the National Guard were staked out and based out. All right, they were sleeping down there. They weren't going home. They weren't, interchanging every weekend. No, they were down there. They were staying in the FOB. They were staying in their own pop-ups, right? So they showed President Trump walking there at ease, right? So you don't do that to a former commander of any sort. Even in the regular military, you don't do that to a former commander. If someone was visiting, they had the privilege to go to a place like that in an operation, you wouldn't at ease them. All right, so there was a lot of that. The National Guard deployed down there the week before and the week after. There was Arkansas and a few other states deployed the week before and the week after President Trump. What order were they deployed on? They had to be under an order. So see, there was not a single, from 2021 to 2025, there was not one single Title 10, Title 32 funding or order by quote unquote Joe. So every bit of the National Guard's operations were under President Trump's orders. That would be that. If that was a real scenario, and I don't know what I know, then that would be straight up seditious act to overthrow the government. All right, now fast forward, go over to April to December 2024. President Trump's running for election, all this other stuff. Joe Biden, all right, the Joe Biden that was a real vice president, he recommended to Obama to use the Logan Act on Michael Flynn, General Flynn, for meeting with a Russian, all right, a foreign leader, private correspondence with a foreign leader. That's what its title is, Logan Act, private correspondence with a foreign leader. To the whole world, they showed that President Trump met with 12 foreign leaders 13 different times at Mar-a-Lago and Trump Tower, which is a private establishment if he was a former president. All right, it's a private establishment. The whole world witnessed it. They had media there. They had everything showing President Trump with Hungarian prime minister, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Every bit of quote unquote Joe, if he were real, they could have barred President Trump. They could have banned President Trump. They could have federally prosecuted President Trump. They could have federally charged him and had real evidence, not hooker and not financials. They would have had absolute major federal crime violations and the visuals for the whole world to see as a front row, as if you were sitting on the jury. You'd have seen all that. You saw it. You didn't even know what you're looking at. That would have been breaches of national security, seditious acts to overthrow the government, etc. You could have booked him on everything. Why didn't they do it? So when you get to 2025 or 2026, no, he's destroying this, and he's doing. Where's the deep state? Who are they? Where are they? What? Because again, if they were going to do anything, and if they were real, they should have done it then when they had Democrat president, Democrat House, Democrat Senate. None of that makes sense to say that the deep state are out there thriving. They're not. The other thing is we've taken control of the systems, the global systems, the monetary systems. We have control of that. Look at NATO, what President Trump's done to them. Look at the Abraham Accords. Look at all the capitulated nations. Look at all the prime ministers and presidents praising President Trump. Look at all the deals he's making. There's no way the deep state are thriving or even around. There's no way. It's not possible. It's just not. Now, are there low-level hanging fruit like libtards and rhinos out there? Yeah, but are they in control of the systems? No. Are they going to get in control of them? No. Look at what President Trump's done with his endorsements. Every single one of his endorsements, if you go to True Social and keep scrolling, there'll be a lot to scroll back to now. If you go scroll, they're highly successful businessmen and women, and they're either special operations, Navy SEALs, and or high-level Army veterans, colonels, lieutenant colonels, which is a straight-up playbook of President Eisenhower after a catastrophic event. Well, what are catastrophic events? Biological warfare, retaliation by the deep state, and then also nuclear. All right, I can point out, and I don't have time to do it on this one, but I've done it on other podcasts. I can point out where you would have seen was a nuclear attack that we prevented and we stopped. That's why all the military aircraft were in D.C. January 2021. That's why they had all the distractions of J6 and all those other things. But there was heavy activity when my former, it ain't really a former, but still, when you're keeping a note, but was my MOS in the military, the Golden Dawn was in full action in D.C. in January 2021, which would have been heavy retaliations by the low-level deep state at that time. Where we are right now, no, there's no deep state hanging. And you have to go back to, again, if they had the power and authority, they'd have had the same power and authority as every other president. So all these key executive orders, all these key national emergencies, and all these key orders from a Title 10, Title 32, even Title 14 Coast Guard, none of them revocated. They're all still under the same orders out there. The National Guard is still operating under the same orders from way back here, President Trump. And then your order of successions. If you went to Google again and utilize your AI and you typed in there, you say, hey, if hypothetically speaking, if a president did not have an order of succession, what would this mean? It'll tell you chaos, right? Especially if something took place, right? Because there has to be an order of succession, and then who's in command and then plan B, plan C, plan D, all the way down. The national security strategies. Quote unquote Joe, He doesn't have a single order of succession in a national security memorandum. How can he meet with the chief of staffs? How can he meet with the generals? He don't even have an order of succession, right? Now I'm speaking as if he was still in there. He's not. But how could he have met with them? He didn't even have a memorandum. All right, you can look at President Trump, memorandum, order of succession, and his memorandums recently, order of succession. You go back to quote unquote Joe. Yeah, they put out these paperworks because the people who would have known to look at it back then, they would have stumbled on it, been like, well, if they didn't have one at all, then you really would have had your answer. But when you go study them, there's no order of succession there. Very key. When you go to the history of defense on the website, how come President Trump's national security strategy of 2017 is the most recent on there? I'm pretty sure they've had time to put up the 2022 that they displayed that quote unquote Joe had, but why isn't it on the actual defense.gov? It's on the quote unquote archive of Joe, but it's not on the place it's supposed to be on. So there's so many things we can sit here and break down, but there's just massive key ones. Tariffs. The tariffs, how are they burdened to the American public right now and the taxpayer if they weren't from 21 to 25? The tariffs were put into place, ladies and gentlemen, January 23rd, 2018. All right, all the tariffs. All right, and then President Trump in the debate again. Oh, did you notice he didn't take out my tariffs? All right. And he said because he couldn't. Then he followed up because there was too much money. No, too much money couldn't be why they couldn't do it. Too much money would be your answer to, oh, well, they would acknowledge it, right? They're sitting there saying the tariffs are bad. So it wouldn't be because it's too much money that they're bad, right? So they couldn't do it because President Trump's alluding to the 45-47. Now, he said that way back when. He's made more comments now that outlines the 45-47 and the disclosure that's coming. Same thing. I think it was NBC. Speaking of NBC, I have to go back and look at the article again, but I'm pretty sure it was. But the same NBC, they're talking about the appeals court on quote unquote Joe, and they used the real Joe Biden with the detached earlobe. I mean, front and center, big photo. So they're showing everybody, and it's leading to that what's going to be the revelation for President Trump, because they're going to acknowledge, and it's going down in the history books, that 45-47. And that's what's going to be his legacy. So the deep state, now when Jaco and other people are talking, they're talking more towards the audience again, because we don't know where these videos are going a lot of times. We try to speak to the patriot world, but you're not the target audience. If you're a patriot and you're tracking what you're supposed to be, you're not the target audience. And when you're guys like us, we care about everybody because we can field any question, no matter how much you're kicking, cussing, screaming, grabbing, and all that. Well, guess what? You're only doing those things because you've been bamboozled by the wrong people. You've been misled by the others. And then we're sitting over here going, I'm sorry that that's been your experience, but look, here's what President Trump's operating with. Here's what he's using. And so it goes back to kind of like most of my general audience are the ones who are reading, studying, comprehending. It's where I'm at now, 2026. I get a lot of new people, but most of my new people are because their family and friends have been talking to them over there, and they go, well, I can't really explain it like Derek Johnson can. So if you'll just go listen to him, that's where a lot of my new people are. A lot of the different podcasters out there that I'm, on with or know personally, they got different clientele in different places, and people are at different levels where they are, and then also what their specialties are. So, sometimes we get lumped together, and it's not always a true assessment. And then also our ages and our age brackets and our differences and how we deliver and what we talk about. Sometimes people try to generalize that, and that can be good sometimes. Sometimes it won't be. But in my case, if like I tell people, you want to debunk me, which you can't, but you want to debunk me, then you got to read, study, comprehend everything that I do. And everything I do outlines exactly what President Trump's doing lawfully from federal, which is little, and heavily military with the PEADs, the executive orders, national emergency, etc. So those cannot be debunked because they have visualizations with them. They have actions and enforcements and validations. And until people read those, study those, comprehend that aspect, then you're going to stay out there kind of in what I call riding the fence world. And that's okay if you're trying, because I know everybody's at different places. But you're in the fence world, meaning that you're going to still listen to some generic stuff and resonate with it because you're not quite where you're supposed to be yet. And then you're going to resonate with some stuff that we call the rabbit hole world, which sometimes can be too far. And then you're going to resonate with right down the middle, which is what I am. I'm showing you exactly what President Trump's doing. I take it day by day. I don't get too far ahead. I don't make hypotheticals, and I don't make guesses too much. I just take what he does daily and tie it into his laws and orders. And that's where everybody needs to be. But if you're rabbit hole and doing whatever, I can't control that. But I would just put in my 2 cents of stay right down the middle.
Well, thank you, Derek. And what comes to mind as we wrap up this special broadcast is we're going to get a lot of help as soon as we begin broadcasting and activate the media center down in Gitmo, and certainly the EBS and EAS, if you will, when that is launched. And to pedal back on some of the content you just provided in our closing segment, you've laid down what I would consider to be irrefutable evidence on numerous cases, and I'm sure you could pile on more of what went on during the 21 through 25 years. And I don't think those points you've raised, I don't think anyone can win a debate about the things you've laid down there. That's number one. Number two, I'd like to come back and talk about the thanks for elaborating on the death of the deep state and bringing some more information forward on that from your viewpoint. We appreciate that. And number three, 45-47, you're right, that will go down in the history books. And I'm sure most of our audience knows that the president, and you certainly can cite them, even I can, how many times and what places he was at, and when he has directly stated what that dash represents. And so you're right. I believe that goes down in the history books. And if the history books are kind, they'll have a little subsection, and they'll speak about Derek Johnson having raised that issue, because you've done a great job at that. And number four, I'll close this out with this statement. Beware the chocolate marbles. You heard it there from Derek Johnson, and a great special broadcast with you, Derek, unpacking quite a bit for me and for our viewers, the target audience, and the deeply awakened. We appreciate you, Derek. We look forward to seeing you, of course, every month at the Global Defense War Military Panel coming up soon. So thank you very much. Any quick closing comments? And where's the best place for people to follow your work so they're not being scammed by the AI imposter and misused Derek Johnson stuff that's been put out there? Best place to follow you?
Yeah, it's just my link tree. If I tell people if it's not on that link tree, it's not my account. So be careful. But link tree is linktr.ee/1776 nation. It'll pull up all my accounts there, and those are my all authentic accounts. And if it's not on there, it ain't mine. I'm not talking to you on Signal. I'm not talking to you on anything else out there, whatever there is. There's so many things that pop up daily, but that's my go-to sources right there. And I will answer on Facebook, and I'll answer on my credible accounts. But other than that, it's not me there. And I can tell people, just my final thoughts. Just President Trump. Again, if I was a billionaire, well, I tell you what, I love my nation, and I have a history like you talk about. I love my lineage and my family and my heritage, and that's the reason why I love what I do, and I love fighting the way I fight. And I got a lot of swamp foxes in my family, and I got a few. I found out we have, which I would obviously defy the British, but I found some queens in my family, and first governor of Maryland in my family, which was before they even had an actual establishment, but it's on the .gov site. But we've been doing a lot of family history. But your fight comes within, and it's just it goes back to what do we want in our future, and it goes back to the National American, Native American. I got a little Native American in me, not a whole lot, but I got enough to be above Pocahontas. I don't think President Trump would give me a nickname like that. I got a little bit more. But I'm not sitting here talking about my cheekbones or anything like that. But I got enough in there that I could have got a scholarship more than her. But I say that, you know, Native Americans have the greatest mindset where you think 7 generations out. And you're thinking as if that seventh generation is going to behold and bestow what you pass to them. And it's not that you're skipping the other generations, but you're thinking that far out. And it goes back to what do we want for our families and our children and our grandchildren and our great grandchildren, and even if you don't have children, what do you want for humanity? And the Bible even tells you that. The Bible even commands that for a man to do so, to lead behind that legacy, and also wealth or whatever it is that you can pass down. And so that's the way I look at. My grandpas, they did that. They said, "Pay it forward, pass it forward, pay it forward." Always walk around thinking like that. Same thing with conservation. When we deer hunted or we hunted, he was like, "Look, you don't kill a deer because you want to kill a deer. You kill a deer because you put food on your table." Now we don't have to do that so much anymore in the standpoint of what our ancestors did, but it's that thought. It's that how you walk around and think. And I think about you before I think about me. If you're thinking about me before you think about you, then the reciprocality of that, we will operate and function a lot better in society when we walk around thinking like that. And at the end of the day, we're going to protect our family and protect us, yes. But if we're thinking about our neighbor first, and your neighbor's thinking about us, and vice versa everywhere, then that's how we forward the world, and we eliminate all this other stuff, this drama, negativity, the hatred, the ridicule, the mockery. I mean, all these negative things that have come into our society because we walk around thinking all the time. And that's what I try to tell people is that, look, I'm subject to be wrong because I'm human, but I'm so studied and read that what I talk about, I'm rarely ever wrong about something just because I'm so read and studied on what President Trump's doing and what he's doing lawfully. And then also looking at all the extra details in these orders that most people are not looking at. They're not even looking at the order as a whole. When you go intricately look at it, that's why 85% of my demographic are females, because I tell people, ladies know this. Ladies will pick anything over with a fine tooth comb, forwards, backwards, diagonal, upside down, sideways, whatever. They're going to cover it because when it's a man saying it's a fact, they're going to be like, we're going to find out about that. And so they'll look at these orders, and you read them. They'll have 5, 6 Title 10s in them, Title 5, whatever the titles are, they'll have them all in there. You got to go read those too and the application of those. So that's why this thing is so broad, but it's also so finite too, because President Trump has hammered every one of them, and he's enforcing all of them, and he's exposing the deep state when he does so. So it's a perfect plan. And I told someone told me at my dad's funeral and said, "Hey, God's plan is always perfect, no matter what it looks like. So don't let all the other stuff out here shake you, ladies and gentlemen. You want to know what's going on? You got to look at what President Trump's using, and that's what I do."
Absolutely. Where we go one, we go all. You've got Q Plus and Derek Johnson making sense of it all for us. And I appreciate you very much, Derek. Thank you so much for doing what you're doing. I've expressed condolences off air. I've expressed condolences on air for the transition of your father to the heavens of the world. And God bless you, Derek. And thank you so much. Rattle Trap 1776.com. Follow Derek Johnson for those just newly being introduced to him. And of course, he'll be at the seat on the Global Defense War Military Panel coming up next here at JMC Broadcasting. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you.
All right. Sheila Holm is joining us on Thursday, July 30th, coming up very soon, 8 p.m. Eastern, live in our private Zoom room to answer your questions for 1 solid hour. We've got seating for 500, so come join us. How do you get there? Visit jmcbroadcasting.com, click on Premium Portal, and see if this is an option for you. If it is, we very much look forward to seeing you there. In fact, Derek Johnson was one of our Patriot Q&A power guests. Previously, we've had Will Barney, we've had Rob Cunningham, and many others, Juan O'Savin, and now we have Sheila Holm, and we're very honored to have Sheila join us. Come join us. We'll see you on July 30th at 8 p.m. Eastern. That's a wrap of this extended special broadcast with our good friend and veteran patriot, Derek Johnson. Thank you, Derek. And thank you to all of our audience, our target audience, our awakened, and everything in between. I always ask everyone to listen with love, because we may not agree on everything, but at least listen with love. And where we go one, we go all. Stay safe, and may God be with you.
Join JMC Broadcasting's monthly Global Defense War Military Panel. JMC hosts an esteemed panel of military experts, including Ricardo Bosi, Tom Lennox, Chuck Sellers, Michael Jaco, Derek Johnson, Brad Wozni, and other military guests. Join us each month, where this panel of esteemed guests analyze the current events across a broad spectrum of topics, addressing the questions and concerns that you have. Subscribe for free by visiting jmcbroadcasting.com. John looks forward to seeing you at the next episode of the Global Defense War Military Panel broadcast, right here on jmcbroadcasting.com.